So welcome guys. Today Sam and I are going to talk about reporting. We're going to talk about how you look at reporting going into peak, and we're going to talk about how you go beyond standard metrics to really get the best out of your reporting. But before we start, just for some quick intros, I'm Nick Handley, so I head up our PPC performance here at Impression. And I work alongside Sam. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a PPC specialist and I work mostly with data attribution, measurement, and lining up all of your reporting sources.
Cheers, Sam. So, as I mentioned in the last slide, what we're actually going to cover. So, there's three main things we really want to run through today. We've got the rapid change in reporting. So, looking at how we've gone from UA to GA4 to everything else that's encompassed. How we can start going beyond standard metrics, because we generally believe that that is the way you get the best out of your performance data, no matter what channel you're looking at, whether that be paid search or paid social or even programmatic. And the last one is actually how you can show value within your reporting to multiple stakeholders, and also ways of being able to do this as well, because we very much understand that you may have your view of the world, but we also know that other people need to buy into that for you to really get your point across within a business. So we always like starting with a little joke, and this feels quite right and quite apt. Reporting isn't just for Christmas, it is for life. And what we mean by this is, we mean that a lot of people look at reporting either to look at optimization or look at how well you've done through peak, but there's a lot of information that you can take from peak and take from rapid learning into your next couple of years and really craft strategy around it, whether that's for product, whether that's for actually how you optimize, or whether that's for just looking at overall business strategy. It's a massive point that you can start speeding up your reporting and start speeding up the optimizations that you want to make.
So analytics reporting has always been an important component of performance optimization across the board, but historically this has been a very linear process. So you have your campaigns performing, the results go into analytics, you get the report on the performance, maybe you then make some granular campaign changes. But with the growth of automation, various changes to measurement, cookies, all of this really changing the game across different ads channels, this has become a bit more of a cyclical process. So reporting has to take place in tandem with performance operations, and it all has to be one big process at once.
So as Sam just touched on, pretty much reporting is a whole framework and it has to be looked at in certain ways. But we just wanted to very much touch on looking at things like where things have moved from as well, just before we jump into the body of what we're actually going to speak about. So we know that Google Analytics has changed massively. It's moved from cookie tracking to AI-based, I suppose, value adding. So we now fill in the gaps that we used to be able to track with cookies. We know cookies are dying in 2024, or should be, if Google goes where it says it is going to. So we need to really make sure that we look at that. So ultimately, we started off with Virgin Analytics. Just for a bit of context, they actually bought that from another company called, I think they actually were called Virgin Analytics, which is quite interesting. They got rid of that. Then became Classic Analytics, and then Universal in 2012. We all loved Universal. That's the one that I essentially started work on, and I believe Sam did as well. So it's what we absolutely love. But now we're going past that because we've had cookie changes, we've had ways of tracking, we've had bigger GDPR things come into play, which leads us to then having a look at GA4 as being our sort of like big one that we have to look at right now, and that's one that most businesses will probably be using.
Exactly, and GA4 is much more bought into this performance and reporting as one whole cyclical process than UA was. At the back end of GA4, there's tons of AI, as Nick has already mentioned. You get predicted metrics, behavioral pattern analysis. This is all being rolled out increasingly over time in GA4. So they really understand that GA4 is not just a kind of post hoc measurement system. It's a solution that takes place alongside your performance operations.
So with all that in mind, we do know that with GA4 coming into the mix and there's been so much change, we know that everyone is sort of scrambling for useful insight. I'm pretty certain there's a lot of people on this webinar and a lot of people we've spoken to individually that don't really understand what should be doing with GA4. We really don't understand how to look at data as well as we did in UA. And that's completely understandable as well. Essentially relearning the way we work. So something to look for is how we actually get useful insight out of what we're looking at and the new ways that we can view data and gather insight. So as I said, we've got multiple ways of doing it. It feels quite apt since this is a couple of weeks back when we had the Barbenheimer thing. Everyone loved Universal Analytics. Everyone doesn't particularly like GA4. just a note on the GA4 side of things, you just have to be a bit more, I suppose, savvy. We find that people that are better with GA4 are generally people that are web developers or have some form of background in analytics or coding. It seems to work better for them. But if you are trying to transition from that UA to GA4, forget everything you learned about UA and just relearn GA4. Don't try compare, just go straight to GA4 as it's a fresh platform. So, as I mentioned earlier on as well, one thing that we do have to look at as well, just to set the scene, is like, we are losing trackable data as well. So we've had all this stuff come through, but with, people scrambling for insights, we know that we've got new platforms we need to look at, but we also have to understand why. We know that we've had, third-party cookies blocked starting early as 2019. I think it actually goes a bit further back from that. And then from there, we've then had iOS, and we've had, Google announcing third-party cookies. And then we've also got, in 2024, Chrome are going to make cookies obsolete, which is why we have to move to these new sort of ways of looking at data and tracking data and gathering it as well. Hence why GA4 is quite an important tool going forward for pretty much everyone in advertising and anyone that runs a business that is e-commerce or a bit more online. And the last one that we just wanted to say that people are scrambling around is attribution. We know attribution's in question. So we have chats about it quite often internally, but we know that all of these attributions that are on screen at the moment, all of them are pretty much defunct now, barring your data-driven, so your DDA, and also your last click attribution in pretty much most platforms now, especially from a paid search point of view. It can make things really difficult, especially when you're speaking to internal stakeholders if you've been running different models. And then it also makes it really difficult to be able to actually garner what is the actual right attribution you should go for, but also where those conversions should come from and what channels they should be assigned to. So just because we've had all this and we've had all this change, we also know that, like, even before all of this, like, things lacked a bit of structure and lacked a bit of depth, which leads us on to talking about our ideas as standard reporting and non-standard reporting.
And we think upgrading your reporting is something that's long overdue, really. So I think we should take all of these changes to attribution, measurement, and all the new possibilities that GA4 offers as a bit of a call to action. So reporting should be about smart insights and not everything at once condensed into one place, which is some trap that often marketers fall into because they want to be cohesive and encompassing with their results reporting, but not always the best way to approach things. So to talk a bit more about how we should approach things, we've obviously looking back at the Latin roots of the word reporting itself, which is reportare, which means to carry back. And a good way to think about reporting is you're diving into the data and you need to make concise and sensible decisions about what you bring back with you to show to your clients, your businesses, your stakeholders, what's actually happening, what matters. You don't want to give them everything. You want to give them a concise, succinct view. So good reporting is about going in, taking what's necessary and useful, bringing it out and giving smart insights.
So we'll talk about standard reporting, and Sam has touched on, some of the bits that make up reporting as well. We sort of wanted to talk about the two different differentiators between standard reporting and non-standard reporting. So we'll start with the standard reporting side of things. What we mean by standard reporting is people look at KPIs, people look at platform stats, people look at platform metrics, but they very rarely go past that. And that's the thing that we generally find that the most insight is going past those standard metrics. We always have to remember that KPIs that are set within a platform are generally a byproduct of a wider business goal or a wider business challenge. Therefore, we need to sort of go past just our metrics. Yes, we need to meet them, but we also need to look past them. We know that standard reporting is very much for driving optimization. It's very much for, it's like business challenge focused to an extent, but is more of a byproduct of that. And the big one for us is we think it lacks a lot of depth. So that's why we always go to non-standard reporting when we're looking at how we do report to our clients and even report internally of some of the things that we find cool within our platforms. So it's a bit more sophisticated. And by that, what I mean is you don't just look at your platform stats. You don't just look at conversions, ROAS, CPA as sort of three main metrics that, let's be honest, most of us do work from. We go into looking at things like profitability. We're going to looking at where that actually came from. And is there any real world changes behind it? Sort of things you'd expect to see. But then it does solve business challenges. Quite often with our standard reporting, we find that it doesn't solve business challenges. It generally just continues a business. So, for example, if you're looking at, say, selling cars or anything like that, but then you've got shipping costs, if you can then use that leverage that information to look at getting as many cars into one place at a time from one certain shipping place, you're then able to ship more cars at once reducing your, I suppose, cost to ship, which is great. But that can also be solved by looking at, wider metrics from ad platforms and also within our, well, I suppose within businesses as well. So that's what I mean by non-standard report. It actually solves the business challenge instead of just sort of like being a byproduct of a business challenge. And then outside of that as well, we find a lot of the time people don't necessarily share information or insight outside of an actual channel. So one of the big things that we do, we try build reports and we try look at data in ways that can be used for procurement. So for any search trends that are coming up that are vastly useful for procurement teams or any buying teams to get ahead of something in the fashion space or to sell more of one product than another. We also look at things like comment data, look at historical data as well, because there's a lot of things that are outside of our core KPIs or our standard reporting that really do matter and actually matter for wider business goals and actually improve the services, product, whatever it is, to be able to get better and also then sell more of it and really meet those business goals that you want to look at.
And while standard reporting isn't inherently bad, it too often becomes bad. It can be boring to write, pretty useless to read across the board. You end up with reports like this, which are just reader engagement has decreased minus 30% week on week, decisiveness fell minus 50% year on year. It's just stats have verbed and then percent changes. Now, too often, this stuff is metric first. It's just the numbers. It's not really telling you what the numbers mean, how they relate to contextual factors. They're just divorced from reality. And that can become very overwhelming when you have a long list of numbers like this. And it's hard to draw useful insights from it, particularly if you're reporting to a stakeholder who's more senior and they don't have quite as much time. They'll be challenged to really get value out of a report like this. It's too focused on specific channels, doesn't really help with your overall numbers when you're looking at actual revenue or trying to consider your entire business funnel. It doesn't pull in any external sources. So a lot of these things that Nick was just talking about in terms of non-standard reporting, where you can solve bigger business challenges by looking at an amalgamated view of channel data, like the shipping example, that's a good use of an external data source alongside the data that you already have from the different ad platforms. And realistically, the big problem here is it's just passive. It doesn't give you actionable insights. A good report gives you a fact and tells you what to do with it. But then even good reporting can fall into the standard bracket. And this is a bit of a challenge really across the board. So ostensibly great reporting falls into a standardization trap. We all get used to reporting in a very specific way in marketing, especially when people come in from a fresh analyst role. I think depending on where their experience lies, sometimes it can be that metric-led thing, but we can also have good reporting that is a similar problem. So you give insights and actions, but they're actually limited to specific channels, or you do offer a broader view of the channel mix, but then this isn't linked up with your business data and your actual revenue and profit numbers. Many businesses struggle with fully connecting the revenue reported in their analytics platforms with their gross and net profits from digital as a whole. And that can create challenges in KPI setting for your marketing teams and alignment between marketing teams, finance teams, which should be a great match, but sometimes is a bit fraught because of problems driven by standard reporting that's a little bit too narrowly focused. So how do we find salvation in reporting? We've picked out 3 key non-standard reporting measurement indexes to focus on here, but this isn't everything. We don't have time in this webinar to discuss all the possibilities, but here's our 3 favorites for now. Lifetime value is a hot topic. It's bordering on buzzword territory right now, but it is really important. Properly calculating your lifetime value from your actual business data can give you tons and tons of insights, like how much of your profit in any given period is coming specifically from new customers, how often your customers actually return for consecutive purchases, and where this happens at different points in the journey, e.g., how often does a user go on to make their second purchase? But then how does that change from the second to the third purchase? You'll often see exponential growth as you get customer loyalty as they spend more and more money with you over time. So finding those kind of pivot points can be really, really useful for understanding how to better target your remarketing. And then we can see even more information from LTV, how customer value itself changes over time and with various engagement signals. So depending on where they've come from, how they're coming to your business again, the kinds of things they're doing on your website. And this can help predict future revenue with much greater accuracy, which means you can set far more robust targets for your marketing campaigns. Although we'd always caution not to delve too far into the future. There's a tendency for some LTV to be very, very far projected. Like this revenue will come through in a year or 2 years, and then you can set KPIs that are unrealistic or problematic, because you're essentially doing speculative finance at that point. And if it doesn't pay off, you're in a really bad situation. So LTV is really, really useful for target setting, but you always have to balance it against what is currently happening right now. And it's something you have to constantly reevaluate as well. And deep insights, really, this is all about understanding that data tells a story, and that means it's always up to interpretation to some degree. You can draw different insights from the same data set, and it's not always going to give you the pure truth. And you can get to a sense of the truth if you understand how to read the data, but data is very easily misread and misrepresented. And this is something we find can happen quite often for clients. Deeply insightful reporting makes it clear that all of your channels don't actually exist in a vacuum, and all the marketing activity you're doing is codependent, it's influenced by contextual factors, and it looks to offer business relevant data that goes beyond any given channel as well. So how audiences are resonating with certain styles of ads or product types, contextual insights on the impact of externalities like economic situations, or even cross-channel competitor activity and what it's doing to your activity at any given time. And then finally, sentiment analysis. This is something that's often overlooked in a lot of businesses, and it can be really, really useful. There's tons of third-party tools for doing this. If you don't have the budget to grab a third-party tool right now, you can still engage with sentiment analysis manually. And I do think it's quite useful to do it, even if it's something like a scheduled regular check-in with socials and reviews to just understand where sentiment is at that given point. Because if there's any period of particularly negative or positive engagement, it should influence how you're assessing prior marketing activity, but then also factor into your launch timings and plans for future activity, because you shouldn't really launch a big marketing push when your socials and reviews are full of sort of angsty sentiment because something went wrong at some point in a different part of the business. Maybe in ops, there was a big shortfall in delivery times and things like that, and that's caused frustration. Launching straight into a big marketing up from there can be problematic. So I think understanding how sentiment is playing into your marketing channel is really important.
So there's a lot that Sam's just covered, and ultimately we do know it is getting increasingly harder, especially with all this change and trying to throw more into the mix, especially for things like Black Friday and peak season. That it can be hard to get buy-in for channels, and it can be hard to get buy-in for changing reporting as well. We've generally found just in our time that there's three main points that we generally get with this. We generally find that stakeholder buy-in is probably one of the largest challenges. So people in a business that just don't necessarily view data or view insights and reporting the way that you do can be either due to historic problems or challenges that they've viewed on a last click basis, or they use GA4. It might actually really undervalue your channel. For example, social channels, we know that GA4 massively undervalues a lot of social channels, which is why you look into other tools and why you try to sell that narrative to them. Ultimately, there's a lot of tools that help you look at different ways of viewing data, and not just from social, but from everything. There's like lower level ones like Triple Whale that you can get involved in, but there's also higher level ones like Segment Stream, which is more econometric modeling. There's things you can do to try to change people's viewpoint of this, which leads on to the second point. All of this happens because there's a lack of education and a lack of understanding on how, I suppose, non-standard metrics or going beyond the standard platform metrics that we see actually help. So it's quite often our jobs as an agency, but also, I suppose, internal stakeholders' jobs and internal media managers, directors, and heads of to really start, educating people on why that's useful for a business and putting a use case towards it. And ultimately, on your agency, in fact, if you are using an agency, they will be able to help you to the nth degree. We can also get people bought in like Google or Meta or even TikTok to help sell that in a bit further as well. And the last one, I mentioned a few tools in my first point as well, but we know that to actually look at non-standard metrics, and Sam mentioned a few about sentiment markers. For example, not everyone can afford things like Sprout Social or other tools like that, but like a measure sentiment. Not everyone has budget for that, so it can be quite overwhelming and expensive to implement those more advanced techniques that whether we're used to doing it every day, not everybody is. We do take that for granted sometimes. But ultimately, it can be really, really difficult to get people bought in when it is overwhelming, especially as coming into peak. But doing and implementing and investing in your reporting now is going to pay off not just this peak, but also pay off next year and the next couple of years, as it allows to get better insights and allow the business to move forward, both from a channel level, but also from, I suppose, a business level in total as well. So we've covered an absolute metric ton of things that you can look at, different ways of viewing reporting, different challenges, and different things that you probably should do. we know that it can be a bit confusing. And to tackle it all before peak, I can probably imagine people sat on this like, probably not. Well, the answer is it actually is a lot to tackle before peak, and we realistically don't think that you should do. That'd be our ideal view. Our ideal world is that everyone has the best reporting ever, helps people like us, and helps you and your business. But we know it's not always, we're not in a perfect world. So we can make it a bit easier by breaking this down. So when we look at the view of, I suppose, like the whole thing of peak, like we have a planning stage, we have activation, we have post-on, we have the future. So we want to break this down. So in your planning stage, we're going to quickly just show you how you can, prepare data and your analysis of what you want to do in your activation stage with your reporting, like how you can actually inform channel decisions with it as well. And this works for pretty much anything, whether you're, like digitally mature to the nth degree, or whether you are, just starting out. There'll be things in here that you'll be able to pull out. And then you go into your post live, so your analysis and insights, how you can actually use that data and look at it. But then probably the biggest thing here is the future. Like how can you use that data and take it forward? Going past those non-standard metrics that people look at during this thing, like sales, and actually going past that and being able to essentially use non-standard metrics to inform your strategy for next year, to inform product strategy and the rest of it as well. So we'll start off with planning, pretty much because it comes first. But ultimately, the way that we have our planning, we understand that planning involves a lot of things. You probably have other things to plan as well. We know that you've got, products to look at, sales, actual, volume of product as well. But we've tried to split this down into a few different things to have a look at when it comes to your planning. Because making sure your data is prepped, make sure your reporting is set up, is going to be the game changer of being able to report internally to stakeholders, to report to people that need to know, and ultimately allows you to pull the data out and the insight that you need. So point one, we need to look at a measurement plan. When we actually talk about a measurement plan, we're not talking about, like a measurement strategy that you need over the course of time. It's just about understanding and aligning the business what you actually want to measure. So people will be bothered about, your conversions and sales or leads or whatever your conversion point is or the event you want to, reach. Make sure people are on the same page. Send things out before you even think of building out reports and be like, hey, look, this year we're going to actually start measuring sentiment, and this is the reason why. Get people bought into that, take them on the journey beforehand, because it ultimately makes them really excited before you even start to tell them, we can look at this and it will do this. But to do that, obviously you need tracking as well. I think everybody hates tracking as much as probably I do, because it's changed so much in the past probably 2 to 3 years. But ultimately tracking is key. If you don't have events on site that are tagged up, let's say that you're using GA4 as your source of truth, which I imagine a lot of you will be. If you don't have certain events tagged up, whether that's through e-commerce tracking or through like just some tracking through GTM, you're not going to actually be able to get any of the insights you want out. And when we talk about those non-standard parts of reporting as well, you can track things that you think are valuable. So have people gone onto a page but then liked it? Have people added it to cart? Your standard sort of like e-commerce funnel metrics, but also there's other things. Have people gone to your blogs? Have people gone to your socials? Because we know social proof is quite a big thing nowadays. People generally buy through it more than just going straight onto the website, unless it is a fast-moving consumable good. If you're in that bracket, you're generally sound, and you're probably serving on Amazon as well, so people buy it from there. So making sure your tracking is actually set up is really crucial. Just have a general look around and test some events. Look at things that you want to track and see if your dev team, whoever deals with that, can pretty much help you set that up. Which then leads into data hygiene. Time and time over, we've seen this a few times. I've seen this throughout my career so far, is that people we've got great tracking, we've got a great measurement plan, but we actually find that the data that actually sits there isn't that great. It's mismatched. It has incorrect revenue reporting numbers. It has double counted conversions. So make sure that's as neat as possible. Get naming conventions. Get your UTM set up. Get your tracking in line, and your hygiene should fall into place. Quite often, and something that I do way before, I suppose, a planning period for peak, is very much look at your syntax for how you do report, and what you want things to be labelled as and naming conventions, because it makes things a hell of a lot easier when you get to this point. And lastly, your reporting setup. This very much ties to your measurement plan and I suppose your tracking as well. When we talk about this, when you've gone through your measurement plan, you'll have cool, I want to show people, some sentiment markers. I want to potentially show people that, we've had X amount of customers that are returning through this period, so we're now a repeat purchase. There's ways you can show that. We generally use Looker Studio, so we plug everything into BigQuery and then throw it to Looker Studio so we can conglomerate and unionize all of our channels to give a really sophisticated view of how things are working. And that's in channel, that's as a business as a whole. And down the line, hopefully we'll be getting a few CRM setups through a data clean room, obviously GDPR compliant. But speak to people. How do they want to see data? What do they want to see it in? If you're using Tableau, if you're using some form of business intelligence software, make sure it's fully set up and set it up way before you need to. You may not be gathering any data at that point because your tracking might not be fully set up for some of the micro conversions or non-standard bits of reporting. Just make sure it's ready. And then you're going to have a bit of a seamless, I suppose, reporting time through the peak season. And it leaves you to do other things like worry about performance or look at product reports and understand what's actually going on and how you're actually trading at that point in time.
Good reporting drives decisive action, and during the activation period, it's pivotal that this is the right action at any given time. So famed marketing expert Sherlock Holmes tells us that it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. And this is a big problem with data. You need to make sure that you're understanding exactly what it's telling you before you make decisions off the back of it. And to do this, we've got 4 points. First is smart measurement, fundamentally important. This is about not only understanding the data you have, but enriching it with the other data sources available to you. So your marketing data can be enriched with margin data and profitability data, and your marketing team having visibility of that is really, really valuable. But this is also includes the third-party measurement solutions that Nick was talking about earlier, our own impression, internal marketing mix modeling solutions. These are all things that we heavily recommend to clients that are doing a lot of middle and upper funnel activity, because those things can be typically challenging to measure through GA4. This is paid social, this is programmatic, it's even TV and connected TV, digital out of home. All these things are very, very, very challenging to measure through typical last click and or even DDA attribution sources. So we would recommend to use econometric models or third-party measurement tools for that. Second point is make sure your reports are full of contextual insights. So these can be cross-channel impacts. These can be contextual data points like economic markers, market state, and have information like consumer price indices mapped alongside your revenue, because it makes some things a lot clearer in terms of downturns that aren't always the result of things you've done. They're the result of things that are happening at a regional country level. There's plenty of public data available to hook into here that you can just pull straight in, clean up, and then put into your own reports. And there's tons of use cases. It doesn't even need to be pure economics. Even things like weather data can be really, really useful. We've got clients where changes in temperature and precipitation, so when it's raining a lot, heavily influences sales. So it can be really useful to see that alongside revenue stream day-to-day time series. Third point is incremental impact. We need to assess true business actuals versus reported results. Don't rely on channel-specific reporting, but don't ignore it either. You can paint a picture over time of how different data sources are aligning and how they fit in with your actual net revenue. And then the final point is sometimes the best action is no action at all. Sometimes good reporting will tell you that you don't need to do anything right now, even if a certain channel appears to be down versus some targets, but wait, overalls are actually up. Perhaps that channel specifically doesn't need fixing. A cross-channel view that has smart measurement can tell you to do that, that will be the right action to take. Whereas if you have just narrow channel view specific reporting, you might start making changes where you don't need to do that. So there is ultimately a story in your data, and you need to be the one to tell it. Once you get to the post-activation period, you look back across everything that's happened, you try and assess the impact of all your activity. Old friends return. You see things that we were talking about in the planning stage, like customer lifetime value, sentiment analysis, they pop back up here. You see how they've changed over time and how they maybe haven't changed too. But you always have to keep in mind that data has a capacity for fiction. It's really, really important that you're fully understanding the metrics you're using, you're fully understanding what they're telling you about any given state. And then you have to consider who the report's for too. As we were saying throughout this piece, you don't want tons and tons and tons of metric-heavy information if you're reporting to a senior stakeholder. Then once we get past this point, we understand that actually this is all linked. This is all a cycle as well. When something is recursive, it means that the process occurs within the process itself. So within the process of reporting, we see that the future is also the planning stage, and this always has to keep barreling on. And it's very important that you start to look at reporting in this way as something where the future is influencing the future past in many ways.
So when we're talking about reporting and all the things with which we just mentioned, there's a lot to run through there. But we know that we need to, we need to make sure the insight is actually going to the right person at the right time with the right things we actually care about. And it's something that I think is vastly overlooked, that a lot of businesses and pretty much everybody generally just provides the same level of reporting to multiple people. And we know that people want different things. So we sort of, the way we report is to look at this in a slightly different level. So we use a top-down approach, which allows us to deliver to multiple stakeholders, generally using the same report, which is actually really useful, not just for us, but for pretty much every level that you can see on this tree on the right. Ultimately, they can pull out the data they want, but there is also an opportunity there if they do want to look at a bit more data, they also can do. So when you're speaking to somebody at C-suite, your like top level managers, your directors, your board level, they quite often don't really care about anything other than how their business is doing. Some will, have an interest or desire to understand the reasons why, but on a rule of thumb, we generally do find that we just want to show them business level KPIs. How are they performing versus, market? How are they performing versus target? Of certainly the things that they want to look at, because that's what matters the most to them. Then you drop down into your standard platform and KPIs as you read down this report normally. That's mainly for channel managers, the people we speak to on a day-to-day, people that need to know what their KPIs are, what they've actually hit, and what metrics are meeting KPI and what aren't. There are certain products, is there anything like that that we need to look into, and ultimately they can then digest that information and provide the insights that's needed to anybody that they have to deal with internally at a stakeholder level. But once you get past this point, a lot of people generally just leave it there, and we generally try not to. We look at non-standard KPIs in the same way. So we know that non-standard KPIs can be, hugely beneficial, not just to our channel managers, but to the wider business. I know we've touched on a few things here about, using things like econometrics, using sentiment markers and other things like that. And just to reiterate some of the points we have mentioned, when we look at this, you can start using things like, for example, sentiment markers to be able to show whether a product is performing, a campaign is doing well, irrespective of how it looks in platform. You could get, say you're a traffic driving campaign, but ultimately you're getting all the traffic, but all the comments and all of, the reactions that you get back from a social point of view could be quite negative or hold negative sentiment. It gives you time to actually look at and address, some things like whether that's a view of a brand, whether people just, don't like the product. It allows you to then, be able to understand that and then be able to feed that back. And then you've got product reports and engagement and market insights. Ultimately, that's for your organic teams and the wider company as well, just to make sure that they're aware of other things that are going on because they can use that information as well. So what's this look like in practice?
Yeah, how do we communicate all of this in actual reporting? And really why it is less time intensive than it sounds. We've spent a lot of time talking about many complicated and different ways of looking at your data holistically, but that is the end game and it doesn't need to be there from the very beginning. The most important thing is understanding what makes a good report. Every report needs to have a why, a goal that is beyond just sharing numbers. It does need to align very clearly with broader business KPIs, and you want to pull in those non-standard metrics to support that. And then you need to understand that data is not the truth, and you need to adapt to tone and content depending on the stakeholder you're talking to. So you need to make sure that your report is telling people what it means in the right way, in a way that they'll understand. Then we need to, it's all right, mate. I was going to say, we also need to make sure we're understanding the difference between reports and updates too, because updates can be very streamlined. They're quick notifications that you send to senior stakeholders or your client contacts of metric shifts. They've got to focus on actions that need to be taken. And then reports are these bigger summative analyses that we've been talking about throughout this piece.
So we know it's all been a lot to take in. I'm sorry for jumping forward there, Sam, as well. But we do have you for this. So Sam and I have put together 2 resources that you can access. So we've put together some practical applications of GA4 because it seems to be the platform most people want to use. And then the next one is a checklist for reporting as well, to make sure you're covering key metrics and going beyond just the standard set of reporting that you normally look at. Sort of a bit of a framework of how you can make reporting a bit better and make sure you tick everything off that the business needs as well.
Exactly. And we'll share all of that online alongside the webinar.
And thank you guys for listening. We're just going to say thank you for now. We've left some key points on the screen for you to have a look over, but ultimately feel free to get in touch with Sam or I if you have any problems with reporting or you want to chat about things in a bit more detail, or even get access to the 2 bits of, I suppose, information that we've put together for you as well. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and cheers, Sam.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone, and Nick.